June 15, 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. Chief Petty Officer Frank Iafrate waded through chest-deep water toward the beach, dodging incoming mortar rounds that threw up geysers of coral and sand. Behind him, his Seabee battalion was landing under fire, bringing with them bulldozers, cranes, trucks, and equipment that weighed hundreds of tons. The Marines had secured only a narrow beachhead. Japanese forces still held most of the island and were counterattacking fiercely. Iafrate's orders were simple and impossible. Build a harbor capable of unloading cargo ships and fueling aircraft carriers. Build it while under fire. Build it in days, not months. Build it from nothing, on a beach that hadn't existed as a port before American forces arrived. The lives of thousands of men and the outcome of the Marianas Campaign depended on getting supplies ashore faster than the enemy could destroy them. Within hours, Iafrate's bulldozers were clearing beach obstacles while mortar rounds exploded around them. Within days, pontoon causeways were extending into the lagoon, allowing trucks to drive directly from ships to shore. Within 2 weeks, a functioning harbor was operating where there had been only open beach, unloading tens of thousands of tons of cargo daily. The story of how U.S. Navy Seabees built harbors from scratch in days is a story of construction meeting combat, of peacetime skills applied to wartime urgency, and of how ordinary civilian construction workers became military engineers who could build anything, anywhere, under any conditions. The Seabees didn't fire many shots in anger, but they built the infrastructure that allowed the island-hopping campaign to succeed and ultimately brought Allied forces to Japan's doorstep. The Navy Construction Battalion's Seabees, from the initials CB, were created in December 1941 out of recognition that modern amphibious warfare required immediate construction capability. The Marines could take a beach, but taking a beach was useless unless you could build facilities to support follow-on forces, supply operations, and aircraft. Before the Seabees, the Navy had relied on civilian construction contractors to build bases and facilities. This approach worked fine in peacetime at established bases. It failed completely in combat zones. Civilian contractors weren't trained for military operations. They couldn't be ordered into combat zones. They lacked discipline and organization for work under fire. Most critically, they couldn't defend themselves or work while being shot at. The solution was to create military construction battalions composed of men with civilian construction experience who could be trained as military personnel and sent into combat zones. The Navy would recruit carpenters, electricians, welders, heavy equipment operators, surveyors, and other skilled tradesmen. They would give them basic military training, organize them into battalions, and deploy them wherever construction was needed. The first CB units were recruited in early 1942. The age requirement was waived. Men in their 30s, 40s, and even 50s were accepted if they had critical skills. The physical requirements were relaxed compared to regular Navy standards. What mattered was construction experience. A 45-year-old crane operator with 20 years of experience was more valuable than a fit 20-year-old with no construction background. The training was compressed. Seabees received basic military instruction, drill, military courtesy, weapons familiarization, small unit tactics. But the bulk of training focused on construction under field conditions. They practiced building roads, airfields, bridges, and facilities using the equipment and materials they would have in combat zones. They learned to work in teams, to improvise when proper materials weren't available, and to keep working despite fatigue and discomfort. The motto that emerged, "Can do," reflected both the Seabees' capabilities and their attitude. There was no construction task too difficult, no location too remote, no timeline too compressed. If the Navy needed something built, the Seabees would build it. The confidence wasn't empty bravado. These men had built bridges, skyscrapers, dams, and highways in civilian life. They knew construction, and they knew they could apply those skills in military contexts. The Seabee organization emphasized flexibility. Each construction battalion had approximately 1,000 men organized into 4 companies. Each company could operate independently, or the battalion could work as a unified organization. The internal structure included all necessary trades: heavy equipment operators, carpenters, steel workers, electricians, plumbers, equipment mechanics, and supervisors. A Seabee battalion was a self-contained construction capability that could function without external support. The equipment allocation was generous by military standards. Each battalion had dozens of bulldozers, graders, scrapers, rollers, cranes, trucks, generators, welding equipment, concrete mixers, and specialized tools. The equipment list read like the inventory of a major civilian construction company. The difference was that all this equipment had to be transportable by ship and able to function in tropical climates, deserts, or any other environment where the Navy might need construction. By mid-1942, Seabee battalions were deploying to the Pacific. Their first major test came at Guadalcanal, where the 6th Naval Construction Battalion arrived in September 1942 to complete Henderson Field, an airstrip the Marines had captured partially completed from the Japanese. Under almost continuous artillery fire and air attack, the Seabees finished the airstrip, built revetments for aircraft, constructed fuel storage, and established repair facilities. Henderson Field became operational and played a crucial role in the Guadalcanal campaign. The Guadalcanal experience established the Seabee reputation. They could work under fire. They could improvise solutions to problems that would have stopped less experienced units. They could maintain equipment under conditions that destroyed machines operated by less skilled personnel. And they could deliver results on compressed timelines that seemed impossible to those unfamiliar with construction expertise applied at scale. One of the Seabees' most important innovations was the development and perfection of the pontoon causeway system for amphibious operations. Traditional ports required deep water berths, fixed piers, and substantial infrastructure. Amphibious assaults targeted beaches that lacked any of this infrastructure. The solution was to bring portable harbor facilities that could be assembled rapidly. The pontoon causeway consisted of rectangular steel pontoons that could be connected together to form floating roadways from deep water to shore. Each pontoon was approximately 5 feet by 7 feet by 5 feet tall, built from welded steel with watertight compartments. The pontoons were light enough to be manhandled by a few men, but strong enough to support loaded trucks driving across them. The genius of the system was its modularity. Pontoons could be configured as causeways, as floating piers, as barges for transporting equipment, or as floating bridges across rivers and lagoons. The same basic components served multiple purposes, simplifying logistics and training. Seabee units became expert at rapidly assembling pontoon structures in whatever configuration the tactical situation required. A typical causeway installation started with reconnaissance. Seabee officers would survey the beach and offshore waters to determine the best routes from deep water to shore. They would identify obstacles like coral reefs, sandbars, or wrecks that might interfere with causeway placement. They would plan the causeway configuration based on the beach gradient, wave conditions, and the types of vessels that would need to unload. Construction began as soon as conditions permitted, often while combat was still ongoing. Pontoons were unloaded from LSTs, landing ship, tank, or other vessels and assembled in the water. Seabees worked in the water, connecting pontoons with steel pins and cables. The work was physically demanding, conducted in surf that could knock men off their feet, often under fire from enemy forces that hadn't been cleared from the area. The causeways were anchored using both beach anchors and deadweight anchors dropped in deep water. The anchoring system had to be strong enough to hold against waves, tides, and the forces from trucks and equipment driving across the causeway. But it also had to allow some flexibility so the causeway could rise and fall with the tide without breaking apart. Once a causeway was in place, trucks could drive directly from ships to shore, dramatically increasing unloading capacity. Without causeways, cargo had to be transferred to smaller landing craft that could beach themselves. This was slow, inefficient, and limited by the number of landing craft available. With causeways, LSTs could anchor in deep water and continuously offload vehicles that drove across the causeway to shore. The system worked even on beaches with significant surf. The pontoons were designed to handle wave action. The connections between pontoons had some flexibility to accommodate the constant movement. Trucks driving across moving causeways required skill, but drivers learned to time their crossings to minimize the effects of waves. Maintenance was continuous. Saltwater corroded connections, wave action loosened pins. Pontoons developed leaks that had to be patched. Seabees maintained causeways even while they were in use, working from small boats to access pontoons that needed repair. The ability to maintain systems under operational conditions was as important as the ability to build them initially. The pontoon causeway system became standard equipment for Pacific amphibious operations. Every major invasion after Guadalcanal employed pontoon causeways to some degree. The Seabees refined the techniques, improved the equipment, and trained new units in the procedures. By 1944, pontoon causeway installation was routine, though the work remained dangerous and physically demanding. The Pacific War was fundamentally an air war. Control of airspace determined whether ground and naval forces could operate successfully. Airfields were strategic assets that enabled air superiority. The Seabees' ability to build airfields rapidly on captured islands was crucial to the island-hopping campaign. Building an airfield on a Pacific island started with site selection. Not every island had suitable locations for airfields. The ground had to be reasonably level or capable of being leveled. It had to have adequate drainage. It had to be large enough for the required runway length. Fighters needed less distance than bombers, so the aircraft type determined the runway specifications. Once a site was selected, usually before the island was even fully secured, the Seabees moved in with their heavy equipment. Bulldozers cleared vegetation and began grading the runway area. The speed of initial clearing was remarkable. A Seabee battalion could clear and rough grade several miles of runway in days working around the clock. The coral base common to Pacific islands provided good foundation material but required different techniques than conventional runway construction. Coral could be crushed and compacted to form a solid surface that would support heavy aircraft. The Seabees developed specialized techniques for working with coral, using it as both foundation and surface material. The construction sequence was standardized to maximize efficiency. Bulldozers and graders shaped the runway profile. Scrapers moved material to fill low spots or remove high areas. Rollers compacted the surface in layers. As each section was completed, it was tested with increasingly heavy vehicles to ensure it could support aircraft weight and taxiing loads. Pierced steel planking, PSP, also called Marston matting, provided quick surfacing for runways in areas where coral wasn't suitable. PSP consisted of interlocking steel plates about 10 feet long and 15 inches wide. The plates had holes to reduce weight and improve drainage. They could be laid directly on graded earth and provided an instant surface that aircraft could use. Laying PSP was labor-intensive. Each plate weighed about 65 pounds and had to be positioned precisely to interlock with adjacent plates. A runway required thousands of plates. Seabees worked in teams, moving plates from stockpiles to the runway, positioning them, and securing them. The work was exhausting, conducted in tropical heat, often while under sporadic enemy fire. The speed of airfield construction was strategically significant. At Initok in February 1944, Seabees completed an operational bomber strip in 10 days. At Tinian in summer 1944, they built 4 8,500-foot runways capable of handling B-29 bombers in weeks. At Iwo Jima, they had emergency landing facilities operational within days of the initial assault, allowing damaged B-29s returning from Japan to land rather than ditching in the ocean. The airfields weren't just runways. They required taxiways, hard stands for parking aircraft, revetments for protection against air attack, fuel storage and distribution systems, ammunition storage and maintenance facilities. A complete airfield was a complex installation that the Seabees built as integrated systems rather than collections of separate projects. Fuel systems were particularly critical. Aircraft required hundreds of thousands of gallons of aviation gasoline. The Seabees built tank farms with multiple large storage tanks, installed pipelines to distribute fuel to refueling points, and constructed pumping stations to move fuel from storage to aircraft. The systems had to be reliable because aircraft running out of fuel was unacceptable. Building under fire added complexity that civilian construction never encountered. Japanese forces frequently counterattacked or conducted artillery bombardments of installations under construction. Seabees learned to work despite incoming fire, taking cover when necessary but continuing work as soon as possible. The combination of construction skills and combat discipline was what made Seabees unique. The night work was particularly challenging. Construction continued 24 hours a day when necessary, and many operations required night work to meet deadlines. Working in darkness with limited lighting, operating heavy equipment by feel and experience, the Seabees maintained productivity that would have been impressive in daylight peacetime conditions. The harbor construction at Saipan exemplified Seabee capabilities at their peak. Saipan had no natural harbor suitable for large-scale cargo operations. The island had been important enough to Japan that they had developed some port facilities. But these were inadequate for the American forces that would use Saipan as a major forward base. The Seabees landed with the assault forces on June 5–10, 1944. Combat was intense, with Japanese forces contesting every yard of the island. Yet the Seabees began harbor construction immediately, working under fire from positions that Marines hadn't yet cleared. The urgency was extreme. The invasion fleet needed to unload and depart before it became vulnerable to Japanese air or submarine attack. The first priority was establishing causeway connections from ship to shore. The Seabees assembled pontoon causeways while mortar rounds exploded nearby. Men worked in the water connecting pontoons, fully exposed to any enemy fire from the hills overlooking the beach. Casualties among the Seabees were significant, but the work continued. Wounded men were evacuated and replaced by others who continued the construction. Within 3 days, multiple causeways were operational, allowing vehicles to drive directly from LSTs to shore. The unloading capacity increased dramatically. What had been a chaotic situation with landing craft shuttling back and forth became an organized flow of vehicles and cargo moving continuously from ship to shore. The next phase was developing deeper water facilities for larger cargo ships. The Seabees surveyed the lagoon and identified areas where ships drawing more water could anchor close to shore. They extended causeways to these deeper anchorages, creating piers where Liberty ships and other cargo vessels could unload directly to the causeways without using landing craft as intermediaries. Simultaneously, they dredged channels to improve access for larger vessels. The dredging equipment, floating dredges and pumps, arrived on later supply ships and was put into operation immediately upon arrival. Seabees operated the dredges 24 hours a day, deepening channels and clearing obstacles that might damage ship hulls. The scale of construction accelerated as more Seabee units arrived. Multiple battalions worked simultaneously on different aspects of the harbor development. Some constructed piers and causeways. Others built warehouses and supply depots inland from the beach. Still, others worked on fuel storage facilities, repair shops, and the other infrastructure needed to support a major forward base. The fuel facilities alone were enormous undertakings. Aircraft carriers and other warships consumed fuel oil in vast quantities. B-29 bombers based on Saipan required aviation gasoline measured in millions of gallons monthly. The Seabees built tank farms with dozens of large storage tanks, installed miles of pipeline, and constructed pumping stations that could fuel multiple ships simultaneously. By August 1944, less than 3 months after the initial landing, Saipan's harbor facilities could handle dozens of ships daily. The harbor complex included multiple piers, extensive causeway systems, fuel facilities, ammunition storage, warehouses, and repair facilities. What had started as an open beach was now a major logistics hub supporting operations across the Central Pacific. The construction quality was high despite the compressed timeline. Seabee training emphasized doing the job right the first time because there often wasn't opportunity for rework. The facilities they built had to function reliably under intensive use. Shortcuts that saved time initially but led to failures later were avoided. The Seabees' civilian construction experience included understanding the importance of proper engineering and quality workmanship. The Pacific Islands where Seabees built harbors, airfields, and bases presented environmental challenges that tested even experienced construction workers. The climate, terrain, and isolation combined to create conditions unlike anything in civilian construction experience. The tropical climate meant heat and humidity that sapped energy and created health hazards. Temperatures regularly exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity approaching 100%. Men working in direct sun experienced heat exhaustion despite taking salt tablets and drinking water constantly. Heat stroke was a constant risk, and supervisors had to watch for men showing symptoms and pull them out of the sun before they collapsed. The rain was another challenge. Tropical storms could dump inches of rain in hours, turning construction sites into muddy swamps. Equipment bogged down, materials were soaked. Work became nearly impossible until conditions improved. Yet schedules didn't allow extended delays, so Seabees learned to work in rain that would have shut down civilian construction sites. The coral that provided good foundation material for runways also created difficulties. Coral was hard on equipment, wearing down blade edges and causing excessive maintenance requirements. The dust created when crushing coral was irritating to eyes and lungs. The sharp coral fragments cut hands and caused infections that were difficult to treat in field conditions. Disease was a constant threat. Malaria was endemic on many islands. Dengue fever affected units that didn't maintain strict mosquito control measures. Dysentery from contaminated food or water could disable men for days. Fungal infections thrived in the hot, humid conditions. The medical requirements for keeping Seabee units healthy rivaled those for combat infantry. The isolation of Pacific Islands meant that supply problems were magnified. If equipment broke down and spare parts weren't available on the island, there was no quick way to get them. Ships carrying supplies might take weeks to arrive. The Seabees had to maintain extensive spare parts inventories and learn to repair equipment, using whatever materials were available locally. Improvisation became a core skill. When proper materials weren't available, Seabees fabricated alternatives. They salvaged materials from destroyed Japanese installations. They repurposed equipment for uses it wasn't designed for. They modified tools to work in conditions the manufacturers never anticipated. The ability to improvise solutions to unexpected problems was what separated good construction units from mediocre ones. The enemy threat added danger that civilian construction never faced. Japanese snipers targeted equipment operators. Artillery fire targeted obvious construction sites. Air raids could destroy in minutes what had taken days to build. The Seabees had to work while maintaining awareness of tactical situations and being ready to grab weapons when construction work turned into combat. Some islands had active combat ongoing while construction proceeded. At Peleliu, Seabees worked on airfield facilities while Marines fought in the nearby hills. Japanese forces occasionally infiltrated American lines at night, requiring Seabees to defend themselves and their equipment. The line between construction worker and combat soldier blurred in these situations. The volcanic rock on some islands created different challenges from coral. Rock had to be blasted before it could be moved. Explosives were always in short supply because ammunition took priority on cargo ships. The Seabees had to balance their need for blasting materials against the overall ammunition requirements of combat forces. Beach sand seemed like it should be readily available on Pacific Islands, but not all sand was suitable for concrete. The Seabees needed sand free from salt contamination for concrete work. Finding suitable sand deposits, transporting sand to construction sites, and processing it to remove contamination added time and effort to projects. Fresh water was another critical resource that couldn't be taken for granted. Some islands had no fresh water sources. Everything had to be brought in by ship or produced through desalination. Water for concrete mixing, equipment washing, and human consumption all competed for limited supplies. Water discipline was as important as any other aspect of field operations. The total volume of construction accomplished by Seabees during World War II was staggering. They built over 400 advanced bases, 111 major airstrips, 441 piers, hospitals to care for 70,000 patients, housing for 1.5 million men, and storage facilities for hundreds of millions of tons of supplies. They moved billions of cubic yards of earth, laid thousands of miles of road, and installed countless miles of electrical and water systems. The construction at Okinawa illustrated the scale. Seabees built a harbor complex that could handle over 750,000 tons of cargo monthly. They constructed airfields that based hundreds of aircraft. They built housing, hospitals, supply depots, and repair facilities for over 100,000 American servicemen. The construction at Okinawa converted a contested battlefield into a major forward operating base in months. The economic value of Seabee construction exceeded tens of billions of dollars in period costs, equivalent to hundreds of billions in modern currency. This represented physical assets, real facilities with real capability. The strategic value was even higher because these facilities enabled military operations that otherwise would have been impossible or far more difficult. The B-29 bombing campaign against Japan depended entirely on Seabee-built airfields in the Marianas. Without the bases on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the B-29s couldn't have reached Japanese cities. The Seabees built the runways, taxiways, hardstands, fuel systems, and maintenance facilities that made the strategic bombing campaign possible. The atomic bombs that ended the war were delivered by B-29s operating from Seabee-built facilities. The speed of construction was as important as the volume. Civilian construction of comparable facilities would have taken years. The Seabees built them in months or weeks. The time compression was possible because of three factors: skilled labor, adequate equipment, and complete commitment to the mission. The Seabees worked extended hours, 7 days a week, maintaining pace that civilian construction unions would never have accepted. The quality of construction was generally high despite the speed. Seabees understood that facilities had to function reliably under intensive use. A runway that broke up under heavy bomber operations was worse than useless because it trapped aircraft. A pier that collapsed under cargo loads killed people and destroyed supplies. The Seabees' professional pride demanded that they build properly even when under pressure to work quickly. The logistics supporting Seabee operations were themselves impressive. Equipment had to be shipped from the United States to islands thousands of miles away. Spare parts, construction materials, fuel, and everything else needed for sustained construction operations had to be included in overall military logistics planning. The shipping space Seabees consumed competed with ammunition, food, and other military necessities. The equipment maintenance achievements deserve recognition. Heavy construction equipment operated in the most demanding conditions imaginable: tropical heat, salt water exposure, coral dust, overloading, and continuous operation. That this equipment remained functional is a testament to Seabee mechanics who kept machines running despite conditions that would have destroyed civilian equipment. The Seabees were officially construction workers, not combat troops. But the nature of Pacific warfare meant that construction and combat frequently occurred simultaneously. Seabees carried weapons and were trained in their use. They fought when necessary, though their primary mission remained construction. The Seabees suffered approximately 200 killed in action during World War II with several thousand wounded. The casualty rate was far lower than infantry, but significantly higher than typical support units. The casualties occurred during amphibious landings, from enemy artillery and air attacks on construction sites, during Japanese infiltration attacks, and in the occasional instances when Seabees actively participated in combat operations. At Wake Island in 1941, before the Seabees officially existed, civilian contractors helped to defend the island against Japanese attack. These contractors were the direct predecessors of the Seabees, and their combat performance demonstrated that construction workers could fight effectively when necessary. The lesson wasn't lost on those who created the Seabee organization. During the initial landing at Guadalcanal, the 6th Naval Construction Battalion came ashore under fire. Several Seabees were killed by Japanese artillery during the landing. Once ashore, the Seabees worked on Henderson Field while under almost continuous artillery fire and frequent air attack. They maintained anti-aircraft positions during air raids, grabbed rifles when Japanese ground forces attacked, and generally demonstrated that construction workers could function in combat environments. At Guam in 1944, a Japanese counterattack overran Seabee positions. The Seabees fought as infantry, using rifles and machine guns to hold positions until Marines could reinforce them. Several Seabees were killed in the fighting. The unit received commendations for their combat performance, though their primary contribution remained the construction work they did before and after the attack. The 31st Naval Construction Battalion at Peleliu worked on airfield facilities while Japanese forces occupied caves overlooking the construction site. Japanese snipers targeted equipment operators. Artillery fire sporadically hit the airfield. The Seabees worked despite the fire, taking casualties but maintaining construction schedule. The airfield became operational while combat was still ongoing elsewhere on the island. Not all Seabee casualties came from enemy action. Construction work is inherently dangerous, and construction in combat zones was particularly hazardous. Heavy equipment accidents killed or injured men. Explosives handling mishaps caused casualties. Heat stroke, disease, and accidents unrelated to enemy action accounted for more Seabee casualties than combat. The Seabees' willingness to fight when necessary earned respect from Marine and Army units they supported. Marines particularly appreciated that Seabees could be relied upon not just for construction but also as additional defenders if positions were attacked. The relationship between Marines and Seabees became close, with mutual respect based on shared dangers and complementary capabilities. Some Seabees received combat decorations for actions that went beyond their construction duties. A few received Navy Crosses, the Navy's second highest decoration, for extraordinary heroism in combat. Many received Purple Hearts for wounds received in action. The decorations recognized that while Seabees were builders first, they were also sailors who fought when circumstances required. The emotional toll of casualties affected Seabee units as it affected any military unit. Men who had worked together in civilian life and deployed together formed close bonds. When friends were killed or wounded, the impact went beyond the immediate tactical loss. Units had to process their grief while continuing to work, maintaining productivity despite the emotional burden. The Seabees' construction work culminated in facilities that supported the atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The B-29s that carried the atomic bombs operated from Tinian, where Seabees had built 4 major airfields capable of handling the heavy bombers. The 509th Composite Group, which conducted the atomic missions, was based at Northfield on Tinian, a Seabee-built facility. The atomic mission aircraft required special handling facilities. The atomic bombs were extraordinarily heavy and large, requiring specialized loading pits where the bombs could be positioned and the aircraft rolled over them for loading. The Seabees built these pits according to specifications that they didn't fully understand, not knowing what the strange bombs actually were. The security around the atomic mission areas was tight, but Seabees had to construct facilities within those secure areas. They knew they were building something unusual, but security restrictions prevented them from knowing the full purpose. The Seabees built what they were told to build, asked no questions, and learned along with everyone else what those facilities had supported when the atomic bombs were used. The role of Seabee-built facilities in enabling the atomic attacks raises uncomfortable questions about complicity in actions that remain ethically controversial. The Seabees themselves were construction workers following orders to build airfields and facilities. They had no input into decisions about how those facilities would be used. Yet their construction work was essential to missions that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. This moral complexity reflects broader questions about military service and individual responsibility. Soldiers, sailors, and support personnel follow orders and accomplish missions without necessarily being involved in or even aware of strategic decisions. The Seabees built what they were ordered to build. They did their jobs with skill and dedication. The uses to which their construction was put were determined by others far above their pay grades. After the atomic attacks and Japan's surrender, the Seabees' work continued. They built occupation facilities in Japan, constructed bases for the post-war military presence, and handled the massive logistics of demobilization. The transition from wartime construction to peacetime-based development required different skills and approaches, but the Seabees adapted as they had adapted to every other challenge. The Seabees didn't disappear when World War II ended. The organization was retained as a permanent part of the Navy, recognizing that the military construction capability the Seabees provided was needed in peacetime as well as war. The post-war Seabees were smaller than the wartime force but maintained the same capabilities and the same can-do spirit. The Korean War saw Seabees return to combat construction. They built and repaired airfields under fire, constructed port facilities to support amphibious operations, and built roads through mountainous terrain. The conditions were different from the Pacific Islands, cold instead of tropical heat, mountains instead of coral atolls, but the missions were fundamentally similar. The Vietnam War employed Seabees extensively. They built bases throughout South Vietnam, constructed roads through jungle, built bridges, and developed port facilities. The scale of construction in Vietnam rivaled World War II in some respects, with Seabees creating infrastructure that supported hundreds of thousands of American personnel. During the Cold War, Seabees built facilities in remote locations around the world. They constructed bases in Greenland, Iceland, and other Arctic locations. They built airfields in deserts. They developed port facilities on islands most Americans had never heard of. The Seabees provided the Navy with the capability to establish presence anywhere in the world that ships could reach. Modern Seabees continue the traditions established during World War II. They deploy to combat zones in the Middle East, building camps, repairing infrastructure, and providing construction support to military operations. They respond to natural disasters, using their construction skills to restore damaged infrastructure. They conduct training exercises to maintain readiness for combat deployment. The equipment and techniques have evolved enormously since World War II. Modern Seabees use computer-aided design, GPS-guided equipment, and construction methods that would seem like science fiction to World War II Seabees. But the fundamental mission remains the same. Build what needs to be built, wherever it needs to be built, as quickly as it needs to be built. The World War II generation of Seabees largely passed away, but they left behind a legacy of achievement that continues to inspire. The bases they built, though many have been returned to nature or redeveloped, represented crucial infrastructure during the war. The tradition of excellence they established continues in modern Seabee units. Veterans organizations preserve Seabee history and maintain connections among those who served. Reunions bring together men who shared the experience of building under fire, of accomplishing impossible missions, of being part of an organization that prided itself on never failing to complete an assigned task. The Seabee Museum at Port Hueneme, California, preserves artifacts and history from Seabee operations around the world. The museum educates new generations about the Seabees' contributions to military operations and celebrates the men who built the infrastructure that enabled victory. The reputation of the Seabees as can-do construction warriors persists in military culture. Seabee is synonymous with construction excellence, with the ability to accomplish difficult tasks, with dedication to mission accomplishment regardless of obstacles. The brand that was established during World War II remains strong 8 decades later. The story of how U.S. Navy Seabees built harbors from scratch in days is ultimately a story about the application of civilian skills to military necessity. The Seabees were construction workers who became military engineers without losing the construction expertise that made them valuable. They brought civilian construction know-how, applied it in combat conditions, and achieved results that amazed even those who commanded them. The harbors the Seabees built at Saipan, Okinawa, and dozens of other Pacific islands weren't elegant or permanent. They were functional facilities built quickly from whatever materials were available. They served their purpose, enabling the logistics that supported military operations, and many were abandoned when no longer needed. The Seabees built for immediate necessity, not for posterity. Yet the achievement represented by those hastily built harbors was extraordinary. The Seabees converted open beaches into functioning ports in days or weeks, working under fire, coping with tropical conditions, improvising solutions to unexpected problems. They built facilities that civilian contractors would have needed months or years to construct, and they did it while being shot at. The strategic impact of Seabee construction was decisive in the Pacific War. The island-hopping campaign depended on rapidly developing captured islands into forward bases. Without the Seabees' ability to build airfields and harbors quickly, the campaign would have stalled or required far more time and resources. The Seabees' construction capability was as important as any weapon system in achieving victory. The men who served as Seabees were ordinary Americans, carpenters, electricians, heavy equipment operators, plumbers who volunteered to use their skills in military service. They were older than typical military recruits, less physically fit by infantry standards, and not particularly military in demeanor. But they could build anything, anywhere, and they proved it repeatedly in the most difficult conditions imaginable. The can-do motto that defined the Seabees wasn't marketing, it was reality. When military commanders needed construction done, they called the Seabees, confident that whatever needed building would be built. The Seabees never said a job couldn't be done. They found ways to accomplish missions that seemed impossible, improvising when necessary, working around obstacles and delivering results. The harbors built from scratch in days stand as monuments to what skilled workers can accomplish when properly organized, adequately equipped, and fully committed to their mission. The physical harbors are largely gone, returned to nature, or replaced by modern facilities. But the achievement they represented, the conversion of hostile beaches into functioning logistics hubs in compressed timeframes, remains remarkable 8 decades later. For the Seabees themselves, the satisfaction of accomplishment sustained them through difficult and dangerous work. They could see what they built, see it put to immediate use, and know that their work mattered. The harbors they constructed enabled ships to unload supplies that kept troops fed and equipped. The airfields they built enabled aircraft that provided air support and strategic bombing. The construction had immediate, tangible impact on military operations and ultimately on the war's outcome. The story of the Seabees building harbors from scratch reminds us that wars are won not just by combat forces but by the logisticians, engineers, and support personnel who enable combat forces to operate. The Marines and soldiers who fought in the Pacific depended absolutely on the supplies that came through Seabee-built harbors and the air support that operated from Seabee-built airfields. The glamorous combat operations were possible only because unglamorous construction work had created the infrastructure to support them. The speed of Seabee construction reflected several factors working in combination. The skilled labor force meant that men knew how to operate equipment efficiently and how to organize work for maximum productivity. The adequate equipment allocation meant that Seabees had the tools needed to accomplish their missions. The motivation created by knowing lives depended on their work drove productivity that exceeded peacetime standards. And the leadership, often civilian construction supervisors who became Seabee officers, knew how to organize complex projects and coordinate multiple work crews. The contrast with Japanese construction capabilities was stark. Japan had skilled construction workers and adequate equipment in the pre-war period, but their military construction units lacked the organization, equipment allocation, and leadership that characterized the Seabees. Japanese bases were often developed slowly using whatever local resources and labor were available. When American forces captured Japanese-held islands, they frequently found construction projects that had been underway for months or years still incomplete. The logistical tail supporting Seabee operations was itself an achievement. Shipping construction equipment across the Pacific required cargo space that competed with ammunition, food, fuel, and all the other necessities of modern military operations. The decision to allocate shipping space to bulldozers and concrete mixers rather than additional ammunition or supplies reflected recognition that construction capability was strategically important enough to justify the logistics costs. The environmental impact of Seabee construction was significant, though this wasn't a consideration during the war. Pacific islands that had been relatively undisturbed were transformed by massive construction projects. Vegetation was cleared, coral reefs were dredged, coastlines were modified. The focus was entirely on military necessity, not environmental preservation. Many former Seabee-built facilities have been reclaimed by nature in the decades since the war, but traces remain visible to those who know what to look for. The relationship between Seabees and the local populations on Pacific islands varied. On some islands, indigenous populations had been evacuated or displaced by Japanese occupation forces before American arrival. On others, Seabees worked alongside or near local populations. The interactions ranged from positive to problematic, reflecting the broader tensions of military occupation and the cultural misunderstandings that occurred when American servicemen encountered Pacific Island cultures for the first time. The innovation that Seabees demonstrated in solving construction problems influenced post-war civilian construction. Techniques developed for military construction under field conditions found applications in civilian projects. Equipment modifications that Seabees invented to cope with tropical conditions or expedite construction were adopted by civilian contractors. The cross-pollination between military and civilian construction expertise benefited both sectors. The training pipeline that produced Seabee units was itself an organizational achievement. Transforming civilian construction workers into military construction battalions required training facilities, instructors, equipment, and time. The Navy established training centers that could process thousands of men, teaching them military basics while preserving and enhancing their construction skills. The training system scaled up rapidly to meet wartime needs and adapted continuously, based on lessons learned from deployed units. The morale among Seabee units was generally high despite the difficult conditions. The men understood that their work mattered. They could see the immediate impact of their construction. They took pride in being the best construction units in the military. The older age and civilian experience of many Seabees meant they were less likely to tolerate military nonsense, but they were also more mature and self-disciplined than younger recruits. The leadership generally treated Seabees as skilled professionals rather than as generic military personnel, which contributed to positive morale. The relationship between Seabee units and the Marine Corps was particularly close. Marines and Seabees often worked together, with Marines securing areas where Seabees would build. The Marines appreciated the Seabees' willingness to work under fire and their reliability in getting construction done quickly. The Seabees appreciated the Marines' combat effectiveness and their protection of construction sites. The mutual respect between these different military cultures created effective working relationships that enhanced both organizations' effectiveness. The medical support for Seabee units had to address both combat casualties and industrial accidents. Construction work involves inherent risks: falls from heights, crushing injuries from equipment, cuts and lacerations from tools and materials. Combat zones added enemy action to these inherent risks. Seabee medical personnel had to be prepared for both types of casualties. The medical challenges were different from those facing infantry medical units but equally demanding. The equipment maintenance doctrine that Seabees developed became influential in post-war military logistics. The emphasis on preventive maintenance, on keeping detailed maintenance records, on training operators to perform basic maintenance, and on maintaining adequate spare parts inventories all reflected best practices from civilian construction that the Seabees adapted to military contexts. These practices were later adopted by other military units operating heavy equipment. The evolution of Seabee uniforms and equipment reflected the organization's unique position between combat and support roles. Seabees wore standard Navy uniforms initially but quickly developed modifications that made sense for construction work. They carried weapons but weren't equipped as infantry. Their personal gear reflected the dual nature of their mission construction workers who might need to fight. The practical adaptations Seabees made to standard military equipment often made sense for other units as well. The Seabees' contributions to victory in World War II were substantial, but have been largely forgotten by popular history. Documentaries and histories focus on combat operations, the battles, the heroism, the dramatic moments. Construction work, no matter how important strategically, doesn't make for dramatic storytelling. The Seabees built the infrastructure that made victory possible, but infrastructure doesn't capture imagination the way combat does. The lack of recognition bothered some Seabee veterans. They had worked as hard as combat troops, endured many of the same dangers, and contributed decisively to military success. Yet public recognition went primarily to combat forces. The Seabees were support troops, and support troops historically receive less recognition than those who do the actual fighting. Other Seabee veterans were comfortable with their supporting role. They understood that their contribution was different from combat forces but no less important. They took pride in their construction achievements and didn't need public recognition to validate their service. The satisfaction came from knowing they had done their jobs well and that their work had mattered. The historical record has gradually recognized the Seabees' importance more fully. Military historians analyzing the Pacific War acknowledge that logistics and construction were as important as combat operations. The island-hopping campaign's success depended on the ability to rapidly develop captured islands into forward bases. The Seabees provided that capability. Without them, the campaign would have been impossible, or at least far more difficult and time-consuming. The technological legacy is subtle but real. Construction techniques developed by Seabees influenced post-war practice. Equipment modifications they invented or refined found civilian applications. The organizational models they developed for managing large construction projects under difficult conditions informed both military and civilian construction management. The contributions weren't always directly attributable to the Seabees, but the influence was real. The cultural impact was limited, but notable. The phrase "can do" entered popular usage partly through the Seabees' use of it. The image of construction workers as unsung heroes of military operations became part of popular understanding of how modern wars are fought. The recognition that support personnel contribute essentially to military success, even if their contributions aren't as visible as combat operations, owes something to the Seabees' World War II record. For the communities where Seabees were recruited, the service of local men in the Seabees was a source of pride. Small towns that sent their construction workers to war remembered their service and honored their contributions. Local histories preserve stories of Seabee units and the men who served in them. These local memories, though not part of national narrative, kept alive the Seabees' story where it mattered most among those who knew the men personally. The physical remnants of Seabee construction scattered across the Pacific serve as accidental monuments. On some islands, remains of airfields are still visible. Rusting equipment left behind when bases were abandoned gradually corrodes in tropical climates. Concrete structures slowly crumble. These physical traces are being reclaimed by nature, but they remain as evidence of what was built and what was accomplished. The spirit that animated the Seabees during World War II, the can-do attitude that refused to accept that any construction task was impossible, continues to define the organization today. Modern Seabees face different challenges with far more advanced technology, but the fundamental mission remains: build what needs to be built, wherever and whenever it's needed. The World War II Seabees established a standard of excellence that subsequent generations have maintained. The expectation that Seabees will accomplish their missions regardless of obstacles, that they will improvise solutions to problems, that they will maintain equipment and productivity under difficult conditions, all trace back to the precedents set during World War II. The integration of civilian construction expertise with military organization that characterized the original Seabees remains the organizational model. The Navy recruits construction workers, gives them military training, and deploys them to wherever construction is needed. The formula worked in World War II and continues to work today because it leverages existing civilian skills rather than trying to train military personnel in construction from scratch. The equipment has changed dramatically. Modern Seabees use GPS-guided graders, computer-controlled equipment, and construction methods that World War II Seabees would find unrecognizable. But the fundamental approach, skilled operators using appropriate equipment to build quality facilities, quickly remains constant. The technology advances, but the principles endure. The challenges modern Seabees face include some that World War II Seabees never encountered. Environmental regulations, host nation sensitivities, and political constraints on military construction weren't significant considerations during World War II. Modern Seabees must balance mission accomplishment against environmental protection, cultural sensitivity, and political considerations. The added complexity makes modern Seabee operations more challenging in some ways than their World War II predecessors faced. Yet the core competency, the ability to build rapidly under difficult conditions, remains as relevant as ever. Natural disasters, combat operations, humanitarian missions, and routine-based development all require construction capability. The Seabees provide that capability, maintaining readiness to deploy anywhere in the world on short notice. The strategic value of that capability justifies maintaining the Seabee organization as a permanent part of the Navy. The connection between modern Seabees and their World War II predecessors is maintained through tradition, through institutional memory, and through the continued use of the motto and organizational identity established 8 decades ago. Modern Seabees learn the history of their organization, understand what was accomplished during World War II, and take pride in continuing those traditions. The lessons learned during World War II remain relevant. The importance of adequate equipment, skilled labor, strong leadership, and clear mission focus apply as much to modern construction operations as they did in the Pacific. The organizational principles that made World War II Seabees effective self-contained battalions with organic capability to accomplish complete construction projects continue to guide Seabee organization today. The harbors that U.S. Navy Seabees built from scratch in days during World War II were temporary expedients, not permanent monuments. Many have disappeared entirely, reclaimed by nature or replaced by modern facilities. Yet what they represented, the capability to create infrastructure anywhere, rapidly, under any conditions, remains strategically important. The men who served as Seabees were ordinary Americans who did extraordinary things. They were construction workers who became military engineers without losing the civilian expertise that made them valuable. They were older, less fit, less military than typical troops, but they could build anything anywhere. That capability proved decisive in the Pacific War. The strategic vision that created the Seabees recognized that modern warfare required more than combat forces. It required logistics, infrastructure, and support capability that matched the operational tempo of mobile warfare. The Seabees provided construction capability that kept pace with the island-hopping campaign, building bases as fast as islands could be captured. The can-do spirit wasn't just a motto. It was a commitment to mission accomplishment that refused to accept failure. The Seabees faced impossible deadlines, inadequate resources, difficult conditions, and enemy action. They built what needed to be built anyway, improvising solutions, working extended hours, and maintaining quality despite pressure for speed. The harbors built from scratch in days symbolize what the Seabees accomplished throughout World War II. They took hostile beaches and converted them into functioning logistics hubs in timeframes that seemed impossible. They built the infrastructure that enabled military operations. They demonstrated that construction capability, properly organized and employed, was as important as any weapons system. For those who served as Seabees, the experience was defining. They had contributed to victory in concrete, measurable ways. They had built facilities that were immediately used and appreciated. They had worked alongside combat forces, shared many of the same dangers, and earned respect through their accomplishments. The pride they felt in their service was well earned.